So we want to start a new sermon series here that we're going to jump into all out of the book of Nehemiah. And Nehemiah, we'll talk about, this is a book in the Old Testament, and here's kind of what we're going to dive into. We call this Nehemiah Courage for the Moment. And here's the reality that I think we always, we don't always recognize that this is true of us because we're all just kind of living our lives, but everybody kind of finds themselves in a moment. And then there's the reality that we need courage to enter into the moment that God has placed before us. And somebody who has shown an amazing example of how this works and how you can do this is the man Nehemiah. And his story and the group of people that he was with when they embraced their moment. Right? And as we look back on him and his story and how he embraced that, it helps us to better kind of lean into and embrace the moment that God has set us into, helps us to have courage in it and to be, I think, a little bit like him in some of the ways that he acted. And let me just kind of break down the big picture of what's happening. Today, I'm just going to warn you, even before we dive into it, we're going to cover a lot of background today, right? So I'm going to kind of set the stage a little bit, try to give us a context for where Nehemiah is and kind of why he's facing the things he's facing. So throughout the rest of the series, it's going to make a lot of sense, okay? So that's what we're going to set up shop on today. But let me show you this first verse, and then I'm going to dive back into it and give us some background to help us understand the rest of it. So if you have a Bible, this is the kind of day you actually would really want to open that up or look on your phone and read. We're going to be in Nehemiah chapter 1 today. If you don't have a Bible and you want one, there's some underneath the chairs there. You can grab that, use it today. If you want to keep it, you can take it home with you. Seriously, yes, you can have it as a gift. We'd love to give that to you if you don't have one. So here's Nehemiah chapter 1. Let me just read kind of the first couple verses here, and we'll start to break it apart. Nehemiah 1 through 3, here's what we find. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hananiah, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. Let me just pause us there just for a minute and try to get us into a bit of a ballpark of what's happening, right? There's a lot of information, right? If you're just hearing that, you're like, whoa, what are all these words? What's all this mean? Here's the big picture, is there's this guy named Nehemiah, right? This guy, and he's interacting with some of his people, his brother. These are people that have been at this place, Jerusalem, and he's asking about this place, kind of his home country, and they're returning from that and giving him a report about it. And he says, hey, how is it? What kind of state is it in? And how are the people that are there? Right? That's what he's asking them. And they come back and they say, basically, this thing is a train wreck, right? It is in terrible shape. It's basically, right, for the sake of our conversation, we're going to say this is in ruins. It's in ruins. The city is destroyed. It says, right, Jerusalem is broken down. Its gates have been burned with fire. The people, the exiles, they are the people who are there are in great trouble and disgrace. So the physical place is broken down. The people are discouraged. This is kind of the state that Nehemiah gets this report of what has happened and how this is all played out. Now, let me back us up. Now that we kind of have this big picture, is Nehemiah's heart is for this area and it's for this group of people because he is one of these people. He is in Persia. He is part of a group of people who have been separated from their home country and their people. And he wants to know kind of what is happening here and how are they all doing. Now, In order to get this, we got to go way back in history, about 1,000 years, okay? So just like travel with me back here into the story. Back in like Moses' day, right? Many of us have heard of Moses. If you grew up in church, you're super familiar. If you're like me and you didn't grow up in church, you're like, yeah, I've heard of him. I don't know a ton, right? But there's a Red Sea thing. I kind of got that part. Here's what happened. Let me give you the high-level short version. Ready? The people of Israel were enslaved in Egypt, right? They were literally slaves, forced into slavery. God miraculously frees them from the Egyptians through Moses' leadership, and then they kind of hang out in the wilderness for 40 years. It's a long, awesome story. It's a big chunk of the Old Testament. But what's happening in that wilderness time is God is forming his people. He's helping them to understand his heart and his vision and what he's about and what he's like. And he's getting kind of the Egypt out of them and getting his heart and mind into them. That's kind of the big picture of what's happening in the wilderness. A lot of painful things happen during that time for them, but eventually there's this promise that they're holding on to while they're in the wilderness that they're going to have a land. And there's going to be a place, and it's going to be amazing. And this promised land, right? You've probably heard that phrase before, is what they were leaning into and waiting to get into, that they wouldn't have to be in this wilderness, this desert anymore. They could have a place of their own. They could set up shop. They could farm. They could have vineyards. They could actually have a fruitful life where they're not just traveling and mobile all the time. When they were on the very kind of the precipice of the promised land, we're on the edge of it, and Moses is getting super old, he's preparing them to enter into the promised land. And in that set of conversations, he gives them some warnings that God wants to make sure they're aware of as they enter into it. And here's what he says in Deuteronomy, right? If you go all the way back to Deuteronomy 4, it says, after you've had children and grandchildren and have lived in the land a long time, if you then become corrupt and make any kind of idol, doing evil in the eyes of the Lord your God and arousing his anger, I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you this day, that you will quickly perish from the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess. You will not live there long, but you will certainly be destroyed. The Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and only a few of you will survive among the nations to which the Lord will drive you. There you will worship man-made gods of wood and stone, which cannot see or hear or eat or smell. So Moses is talking to this group of people, and he says, hey, you're about to go in, right? You're on the edge of this promised land. And if you if you leave God, you start to worship other gods, what's going to happen is you're not going to be able to stay in the land anymore, right? And throughout Deuteronomy, there's this repeated warning that other nations are going to come and they're going to take you out of the land. They're going to destroy the land that you were in and a part of, and you're going to be in exile to this promised land that I have given to you and asked you to go and possess. When Nehemiah is in his day, when he's looking at the ruins and hearing about the ruins of Jerusalem and the people that were left there, this remnant, what has happened is these people have had this warning play out, and they have been taken, actually multiple times, out of this land by other nations, and what has been left is destruction and a small group of people that remain in this land, kind of beat up and left here. Nehemiah knows that what has happened is exactly what God warned them about. And then this other piece of it, Nehemiah also knows. It says this in 29, right? This is Moses talking to the Israelites again on the edge of the promised land. But if from there you seek the Lord your God, you will find him if you seek him with all your heart and with all your soul. When you're in distress and all these things have happened to you, then in later days, you will return to the Lord your God and obey him. For the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not abandon or destroy you or forget the covenant with your ancestors, which he confirmed to them by oath. So Nehemiah is looking back to what was spoken 1,000 years before and saying, I think what we're witnessing here is exactly what God said would happen. Ruins, destruction, exile, people have been displaced, remnant. And there's a recognition that what could happen in this situation is God could do something different. He promised us that if we seek him in the midst of this destruction, even if we're far away, like in Persia, if we seek him, he'll bring us back into this place and restore what has been ruined. Everybody with me? A lot of background, I know, a lot of information. You're doing good. So Nehemiah, he is an interesting guy, and we can learn, I think, a ton from him. Because Nehemiah, disconnected from what was said 1,000 years ago, he could have looked at what played out here. The destruction of his homeland, the destruction of the distress of his people, and he could have looked at this and like many other people have looked at this same situation, and they could have landed in a place where they said, hey, this thing, it's hopeless. That nothing could put that thing back together. I don't think anything can help those people. He could have looked at this thing and felt a sense of being helpless, of being hopeless, and saying, I don't know how we could bring help to this. This is kind of beyond anything that we could ever bring help to. Now, Nehemiah would have there were other attempts to bring help. Some of that plays out in the book of Ezra, which Ezra and Nehemiah in the Old Testament were kind of one thing. They were more seen as one book. They would have tried to go back and do some things here and there and put some pieces together, and some of that worked and some of it didn't. But Nehemiah wouldn't be the first guy to see the ruins. He was the first guy to look at it and say, something has to happen here. Something's got to change. We see what it is. It's not a denial of reality. It's not a sugar coating of the brokenness that exists. Something has to be done here, because he didn't just see what was. He saw what could be. He even saw what should be. He saw what God said could be. And that vision, right? That vision would aim him in a certain direction as he starts to interact with these ruins, right? He could have looked at this and been hopeless or helpless. He could have looked at this and been apathetic. And he could have said, hey, this is how it always has been. Let's just try it. Who cares? Let's just get lunch. This is right. We're not going to change anything. It's not that big of a deal. I'm just going to accept the status quo, and the ruins of the day that we find ourselves, the moment we find ourselves in, it is what it is. Oh, well, who cares? Right? Remember, he's far away from this thing. He's disconnected. He's got a report. And I want us to see how he responds, okay? Because we can kind of see ourselves in this story. Before we can see his response, I want us to see, we can see ourselves in this story. We have ruins in our lives. Right? There's wreckage back there. There's brokenness. And it starts to feel normal. That broken relationship or that person that is without, that they're like too far gone. They can't be helped. They're like, yeah, God could do anything except for that guy. That we have those stories, and the brokenness and the bad habits and the ugly, it becomes normal. And we live in it. And we start to not see it after a while. Right? It's kind of like when you live in your house and you got a house project that's like 90% done. Right? And there's that one thing that needs fixed. And you just stop seeing it till a neighbor comes over. And you're like, man, I got to get that done. Right? I got to fix that thing. Wow, how did I not see that? And it's the fresh eyes. It's the fresh vision of it. It's the brand new view of it that says, wait a minute, this has to change. This can't be this way anymore. Okay, watch how Nehemiah responds. Here's what he says in 1:4. He says, when I heard these things, ruins, when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before God, the God of heaven. Nehemiah, we're going to see in a little bit here as we look at the book, he's a man of action. Guy's a doer. A bunch of you are doers. Right? He's going to go make stuff happen. His first reaction and his first response was not to go make something happen. His first response was to stop and let the reality of the situation affect him. What he did is he took God's vision, his view of this, and the heartbreak of what this is. He knows that God is a merciful God. We just read that. And he took some time and he said, I'm going to, in essence, align my heart with God's heart. I'm going to take my situation, the reality of the ruins that exist. I'm going to bring this before God and ask that he would work on my behalf. He prayed, he fasted, right? Fasting is to go without food or water for an extended period of time. He wept and he said, God, do something here. I want us to see his prayer. Man, it's powerful. It's long, but just track it with me. Here's what he says. Then I said, Nehemiah's prayer, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night. For your servants, the people of Israel. He said, I confess, listen to this, I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses. Just pause there just for a second. Look what he does. He aligns his heart with God. He says, this is broken. This is shattered. This breaks my heart. And he brings it to God. And then what he does is he takes ownership of it. He takes ownership of it. He doesn't go another direction. Could he go blame somebody else? You know what? They did it. It's their fault. Those people, that nation took us away. They did it. They're the enemy. Guys, literally, nations ripped them out of their own home country. Can you even imagine? All the room in the world to land in a place and say they were the bad guys. Look what he does. He says, this is on us. This is on my fathers. This was on my watch. I did it. I didn't seek you. I failed you. I didn't move towards you. I'm owning this. And he recognizes that in this situation, right? Don't assume that this is the case for everyone. God literally promised, if you abandon me, this thing's going to be left in ruins. So he takes ownership of it. This one's on us. right? It's not the right, it's not the left, it's not the Babylonians, it's not the Persians, it's me. This was on my watch. Unbelievable leadership. Took ownership of it, moved towards it, confessed it. Far away. He goes on, he says, then he leans in and he leans into his faith. And he says, remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses. God, what's he saying? He's saying, God, remember what you said 1,000 years ago. Remember what you promised him. And he's calling God to his word, saying, if you're unfaithful, I'm going to scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and you obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place that I've chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people whom you redeem by your great strength and your mighty hand. It says, Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. He says, God, that you said you would do this. You said you'd pull us back together. You said you could breathe new life into this. And I'm asking you to. And watch the final part. He says, give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. And he says, just this beautiful sentence, I was cupbearer to the king. And what Nehemiah is going to do is his first response, of course, is to align with the heart of God, seek him, own his part in it. And then here's what he does after he seeks God in prayer, is he's willing to take action. He's willing to be the answer to the prayer that he is praying before God. God, return. God, restore. God, do your thing. God, I'm willing to be a part of it. What he goes to do is he goes to put his self at risk by asking the king to go and rebuild and restore the ruins. My area is destroyed. My countrymen, my family is in ruins. Will you let me go, leave my duty, and go do this? And he says, God, I want you to grant me success. He leans into action in his prayer. It's what he wants to do. And God grants that request. Right? And that begins our story of Nehemiah, of how he leans into the ruins. And guys, this heart of moving towards that which is broken, that which is shattered and devastated, is the very heart of God. This is what Jesus did for us. When he looked at the ruins of our broken lives and our sin and our mess, and he said, Jesus, I want you to move into that. And I want you to restore what has been broken and destroyed, and I want you to bring new life out of what's dead. Guys, this pattern is a reality that I think every believer faces, every person faces, right? If you're a follower of Jesus, you're going to be presented with some version of ruins. There's some need. There's somebody that needs the hope of Jesus, or needs a peacemaker to enter into their story, and it's scary. And a bunch of people are going to look at that set of ruins, and they're going to look and say, that thing is hopeless, help, no chance that thing's going to work. Who cares if it doesn't work? Let's go to lunch. What does it really even matter anyway? You know why this is messed up? Because so-and-so didn't do. And that's how the stories play. And you and I are going to find ourselves in these situations where this plays out. I'll never forget when this campus that exists right now, I was asked to come be kind of the interim leader, the short-term leader of this campus. It was called the Ellet campus at the time. We had a leadership transition. And the campus at the time was, it was in a high school, and people were leaving, and people were discouraged, and people were confused, and people were wondering, how do we move forward? How do we move forward? And there's all kinds of totally good reasons for how this story played out, but it's kind of where we found ourselves. And I remember showing up, and I'm like, hey, guys, like, I'm just here for a little bit. I'm going to try to give some stability. We'll see what happens. But there were no clean, easy answers. There was no place to land. We couldn't find a location. We interviewed a bunch of people to take the leadership of this campus. I was in the interviews. No answers. Right? And so here's what we did. A handful of people, what we determined to do was this. We said, we're gonna spend 100 hours in prayer together. We don't know exactly what to do. We could do stuff, but we could make something up. But what we really want to do is we look at the situation of where this campus is, and when we look at it, we see that there's enormous opportunity. We looked and we said, these people are amazing that God has brought together here. We found a research, there's about 100,000 people within a 5-mile radius of Springfield High School, right? Which is not that far from here. We found out that a huge percentage of those people had single-family homes and were in need of additional aunts and uncles and moms and dads to come in and fill the gaps. We found out that there was enormous openness for the gospel in this area. And yet, we were kind of sitting in the ruins. And we said, what are we going to do? We're like, well, let's just pray. Some of you were in the room doing this. You remember this moment. And we got together in the morning, and we got together at night, and some people prayed on their own, and we gathered. Some people said, I had 15 minutes, I had an hour, I had 2 hours of prayer, and we gathered and prayed, and we just sought God like crazy. And God worked in that alignment of our hearts. And you know what happened after a few weeks? Nothing. We were still there, still scared, still praying. And then God moved in my heart in a way that I didn't expect. And I felt called to be here. And that when I started praying that way, that wasn't on the table for me. I wasn't like Nehemiah. I wasn't really willing to be the answer to my own prayer. I thought I was finding somebody else to fill the spot. God's like, nope. We asked God for some leader to lead us through, and we asked God to give us a building. And so we prayed that hundreds of hours of prayer. Nothing really happened. He moved eventually in my heart. A few months go by, and then you know what happened? COVID. Yeah. It's like, you want a building? How about no building? I don't think he said it like that. That's kind of what happened. Oh, you don't like the high school? No. It was and we went homeless for a little bit, right? And then God miraculously brought us Crossview here to this building, the group of people that we just instantly joined and linked up with and were one in heart with. He said, here's the building. That's the short version of a longer story. Here. And it has been exactly what we needed. And he didn't just answer that prayer, he answered the additional prayer. Here's another building. I tell my pastor friends about this, and they're like, how many free buildings did you get? It goes just like that, right? I'm like, guys, I have no idea how this happened. Right? Listen, when I told people what we were doing and what God was calling us to, some people looked and said, it's not worth it. It's hopeless. Why would you do that? Some people, right? All of this was happening. But what I found when I came here, I found a group of Nehemiahs. I found a bunch of them that said, we see what is, it's kind of crazy, but we see what could be. And we see what should be. We see that this area needs a strong church. And these families need a church to lean into, and people need Jesus, and the hopeless need hope, and there's some beautiful things happening in here, just like there were beautiful things happening in Jerusalem, but there's also a lot of ruins. And the pattern that God often uses is he moves a group of people into the ruins that he might make beauty out of ash. I think that's what he wants to do with us. I think that's what he's doing. And I look around, guys, and I think, oh, what an opportunity. This is incredible. It's absolutely incredible what God's doing. The story just doesn't make sense on paper. But like Nehemiah, as we're going to see in his story, he would face opposition doing this. He would find haters doing this. He would find difficulty doing this. He would expend himself and sacrifice in this mission. And the people that he did this with did the same thing. And as we go into this move, I need you to know that some of that's probably going to happen with us too. That this probably won't make sense to everybody. Why are you changing things? Why are you trying to do that? It's my favorite hand motion, right? We're gonna run into friction here and there. But like Nehemiah, we want to look and say, no, but it is worth it. The people are worth it. The students are worth it. The kids, the families are worth it. Those who could recover and come out of addiction are worth it. Those who can find meaning and purpose they're worth it. And this is what the gospel always does, is it changes a heart and it moves it into a dark place, a difficult place, a ruined place that hope and life and light could be found. And I think what God would look at us today and ask is, will you be Nehemiah? Will you do it? Will you do your part in it? Will you carry the work? And what we're going to see in this book is this work cost him. What I found in ministry is it's costly. It's beautiful and it's beneficial and it's wonderful. I would never trade it, and it has cost me far more than I ever thought it would. And how God works is he looks at his followers and he says, I want you to be my children. I want you to look like Jesus. I want you to lay down your life that others might find it. Enter into the ruins. So guys, we're going to enter into the ruins. And I don't even totally know what that means yet. Just like I didn't totally know what it meant 3.5, 4 years ago when I entered into the Elliott campus in that moment. But here's what you're going to find. We're going to find, just like Nehemiah did, a joy and a unity and a vibrancy, and we're going to find changed lives in here. Here's our question, right, for the day. Will you have courage for your moment? Will you have courage for your moment? You and I are not on the planet just to take up some space and hit the next milestone. Graduation, marriage, moving, vacation. Those things are wonderful, and they're gifts, and enjoy them. They're awesome. And they're not the reason we're here. He has placed us here to glorify him, to point to him, and to tell people that are in the midst of pain and suffering and difficulty about the great news of what Jesus has done. Followers of Jesus are people of courage, straight up. If you have been presented with a follower of Christ and they seem like they were stuck up or hypocritical, or that's not what I see. I see boldness. I see courage. I see humility. I see a willingness to go into difficulty, the difficulty of a ruined family, a hurting person, into their story, into the mess of it, even if it makes me feel super out of my comfort zone. That's what followers of Jesus do. That's what Nehemiah did, right? Long before Jesus would even show up on the scene. Here's the question. What are the ruins that you're facing today? And will you be a Nehemiah? Will you move into them? That might be leaning in and uncovering a difficult, broken relationship. That might be moving towards somebody that everybody else is moving away from. That might be looking and saying, hey, I'm gonna be the church, not just consume the church. I'm gonna show up and I'm in. I'm doing this. I will not be passive any longer. I want to lean into it with you. Might be a mix of all this. These are the questions I think the Lord would put before us today. What vision, when you look at the ruins, what do you see? Have the band come up. I'm going to pray for us. We'll sing and we'll worship as we wrestle with our hearts together. Lord, there's just no other way to explain it except looking at the magnitude of your love. Lord, you are love. Your word tells us that. And love always gives itself away. God, would you change us, cause us, compel us to be more and more people of love? Lord, would you help me to do that? Lord, would you help us to see in the ruins what could be, what should be, what your will is in the midst of the brokenness. God, give us vision. Give us faith. Give us courage to refuse to allow the status quo to be our normal. Lord, would you move in our hearts even now?